All right, welcome back, everybody. We're at week 4 of class, so we're like officially at the mid-breaking point of class. So I hope everyone's been enjoying it so far. I have certainly learned a lot, especially about Run Comfy, unfortunately, as well as just sort of like seeing how people are using the tools and whatnot. So this week we're going to go over control nets. We'll talk a little bit what they are, how they work. We'll probably explore a couple different control nets, but there are a lot of them. So definitely say if you're particularly interested in this topic, you might want to go and play with a bunch of different models. And then starting next week, we're going to start to look at animations. And all the stuff we've been learning so far will also be really important for animations. We're kind of just building up our workflows and building up all of our pipelines, because when we hit animation, stuff like control nets are really, really important. Or, even IP adapter, like all sorts of things. So all this will be building, and I think animation is, I know I've talked to a couple people I know that are really excited about that part. So that's where, again, we'll start to see really the power of combining all these tools in a really interesting way. I know we missed the Q&A session last week, so I'll do another one this week on Thursdays. So if you do have questions, please come to those. If you don't, no worries. You can also always use Slack if it's easier to do it that way. Yeah, so let's jump into control nets. So over the past couple weeks, we've sort of looked at how to build up pipelines and workflows and tools as a way to sort of gain control over images, right? So first week, we looked at how to do prompting. How do we write better prompts using machine learning tools themselves? How do we increase our prompts, using other things? And then I guess actually in week 2 as well, we started to look at image to image, right? So when we feed an image into our model using the VAE encode node, that allows us to then set some denoising values and kind of determine how much of this image should we keep in the exported image or the output image. And then last week we looked a lot more at LoRa's and IP adapters, right? And these are ways to add style to our images, like particular style that we want to train on using a LoRa, or maybe as a one-shot sort of image where we didn't really even cover this last week, and I might record a secondary video on it. IP adapters are also really good at matching faces. So say you want to put your face in something, there are specifically face models in IP adapters that allow you to do that. So maybe I'll record a secondary tutorial on that for anyone that's interested in that. So LoRa's, you get a little bit more wide range of styles. IP adapters tend to stick a little bit closer to the image as you feed it. All these give us controls, but one thing's kind of missing here, which is structure, right? So let's say that I have an image that I really want to take the structure from, whether it's a person's pose, whether it's a building, any number of things where I have structure, and I want to keep that structure, but I want to completely restyle the image. In this case, image to image is probably maybe our best option. But even with that, when you denoise it too far, right, you set a denoise to 0.8 or 0.9, it loses a lot of that structure. And at best, it might keep colors. IP adapters are good for reusing faces or shapes or whatever. But if you want to move an image or move a shape in a different direction, you can't really do that. And LoRa's really good at style, but not necessarily structure. So this week, we're going to look at control nets, because control nets are really what give us structural style, or structure underpinning the images. And the key with control net is picking the right model, picking the right structural model. So in this case, you'll see here on the left is an image that someone uploaded of a body, so sort of seeing where the poses are. And then you can take that pose structure and you can then apply that to your new image. So in this case, if we were to try to do this with image to image, you wouldn't be able to recreate a spacesuit, right? It would just be black. The colors would stay there, and the further you denoise it, the more the hands are going to get distorted, that sort of thing. So the cool thing about something like this, and this is just one of many models, and we'll look at all the potential models available to us through ControlNet, is we can just pull out the skeleton using something like OpenPose or another pose detection system, and then apply that to our guidance for our image output, and completely restyle the image, but keep as much of the underlying skeletal structure as we want. This is really great for body poses. This is a big thing, right? You want someone's body in a certain position. Traditionally, with a lot of text to image models, if you tried to feed a body pose using image to image or just a text prompt, you would end up with a third leg or a third arm, or just the body would be kind of in a weird distorted position. This allows us to maintain those positions in a really nice and easy way, while also then being able to use IP adapters, LoRa's, image to image on top of all these things to create a really nice sort of complex workflow. So there are a number of control nets available, and there are ways to train your own, although I don't know of a lot of use cases to really train your own. This is the link to the main control net GitHub repo from this person called Ilya Savio. Probably butcher that name, sorry. They were sort of one of the first people to create these control net models. And these particular models in this repo only work with SD 1.5. And I'll talk about that in just a minute. But if you scroll through this repo, there's actually quite a lot of detail about what tools are available to you here. So the number of different inputs for control nets are quite varied. So we looked at OpenPose really quickly. If you've ever done any computer vision work, you're probably familiar with Canny. So Canny kind of gives you outlines or gives you where sort of the most contrast are in images and generates lines there. So there's a way to feed in Canny into your images. This would be good if you want to keep a lot of the textural structure of an image, but maybe you want to recolor things. So you can kind of see here the bird is recolored, but a lot of those hard edges are still sort of kept. There's a model called MLSD lines. This is more like architectural drawings. So this one might be better for textures or bodies or that sort of thing. This is better at keeping the strongest lines in an image. So again, maybe you want to keep the architectural structure of this image, but restyle it in different materials, different backgrounds, that sort of thing. There's a control with HED boundaries. Some of these I feel like they're like just slightly different models, right? They all kind of do similar things. This one gives you a little bit of of the canny sort of look, but they're a little bit fuzzier, and they give you a little bit more. There's a little less like obvious structure here. So it'll keep some of the hard edges, but it won't always have like the hardest of edges in every place. Scribbles, this one's very common. Lots of people like to use this one. They'll take their kids' drawings and then feed it into this model, and then they get output a photograph. So you're able to take a scribble and it kind of makes something more photorealistic. Fake scribbles, this I believe is like another machine learning model. So there are a lot of machine learning models that will generate these sort of drawings, and then you feed that drawing back into this model. So just like Canny is as a computer vision edge detection system, you can feed an image into Canny to generate the Canny edges, and then feed that into your control net to then use it in other examples. So you can kind of see like, each one of these has a slightly different use case. I would definitely say I recommend like playing with them. The one I think is very clearly like doing one purpose is the pose detection system. These are really meant for purely when you want to match human pose to another human pose. So that's really its use. I'm sure you could hack away for it. There's a pose detection system for animals, I think, as well now. I haven't used it, but there are, if you've got like a four-legged animal, there are now pose detection systems for that too. So maybe you could create a cat. Although I don't know if I've seen I don't know if I've seen a control net yet that works with that, but we can look around and see if anyone's made one. Segmentation. So if you're using a semantic segmenter, there are a bunch of them out there. It looks like this one uses 80/20Ks. So again, there's probably other segmenters out there as well. The key is you need to make sure your color mapping is the same, either this one or find a different model that does the segmentation. I don't know why you would segments with houses are kind of weird. I always see this more as like a computer vision for like machine learning in cars, where you're sort of segmenting out people, roads, bikes, buildings, that sort of thing. So there's lots of different models that allow you to do that. And kind of see with this one, it's kind of interesting how different the outputs are because the segmentation is pretty blobby. You can generate pretty different sort of systems here. Looks like here's a good one that kind of does more scenery. And then depth models. This is one that I think pretty much everyone uses in some way or another. Being able to feed in a depth model allows you to have a lot of variance in your outputs while also maintaining a really good amount of structure and actually understanding that sort of that depth, right? So this will understand that there's something in front of this person or in front of the shape, and then you can use that. So we'll probably look at the depth model this week as well as OpenPose. There's another one for normals. So if you do have a 3D model that has normals built into it, you can generate the normal map from it. I know there's other tools that also we'll take an image and output it to a depth map, or sorry, a normal map, and you can feed that in as well. So there are a number of different tools, and I guess there's like a new one that's just anime only. So there are a bunch of options here. I believe Run Comfy comes with all of the models already installed, so you can actually just pick whichever one you want. If you're running local, you might want to go in and just pick your favorites because it's a lot of models to deal with. But we'll look at how to play with a couple of these now. As I mentioned, this particular repo is all for SD 1.5. And I would say most people have sort of found the SD 1.5 models to be the best. There is another repo here that is all SDXL models. It doesn't support the same amount. So you'll see here that we have a canny one, a depth one. I don't know what Zoe depth is. This one's a smaller model, so I guess this one may be faster. So most of the models that are supported for SDXL are only canny depth, only canny and depth. I feel like there's a Scribbles one somewhere that I haven't come across. Maybe it's on a different site, but there are some other ones. All of these have been labeled as experimental, and I've definitely found they are not as accurate as the 1.5s are. The downside is no one really owns the control nets anymore. So there's no one group just making control nets. So in that way, it's like you're kind of waiting on someone to train something on that. And now I've got all the new models coming out that we'll talk about in the second half of class. So we kind of have to like see where these things go and see if we get better results. What are these fine tunes? Not what I was looking for. Okay. So there's the control nets there. Paste this link in for everybody if they want it. Cool. So what we'll probably start with, again, these have to be trained on a specific base model. So that just like IP adapters or LoRa's, we do need to worry about this specific base model. The one thing I have found, however, is if you have a fine-tuned model, like a 1.5 model trained on anime, or an SXL model trained on photorealism or something, I actually do find the control nets still work fairly well, as long as you're connecting 1.5 to 1.5 and XL to XL. Quirks of these tools, I'm not really sure why that is, but they do tend to still work well even with fine-tuned models. All right, let's jump into Comfy and take a look at these. All right, so I'm going to start with a default Run Comfy workflow. Let me just clean up my space here a little bit. Okay, so what we have here is our basic workflow. And for anyone that is running locally, all of the ControlNet nodes come pre-installed with the default version of Comfy. So you'll still have the nodes. The thing you're going to want to worry about are your models. So if you go to Manager and then go to Model Manager, and then in search, type in ControlNet, you'll see you have a lot of different options. I recommend you mostly look at these. So these are the 1.1s. These work with, you'll see the base model here is SD 1.5. So anything that says ControlNet-V1-1, these are different models you can use. So there's Canny, there's Depth, there's Line Art, there's a bunch of these here. And the Excel ones, I believe, are just above here. Yeah, it's these here. So you'll see that there are different ControlNet models for Excel as well. And you could also download them directly from the diffusers page and download them if you want to. You'll see there are some that are small and full size. That maps to what you see here, which is that some of these are about half the size of the others. So these are the large ones, and there are some small ones. So there are additional XL models. There's one for Sketch, one for Recolor. I don't even know what that one is. Let's see if this is listed here. Oh, there's stability, made by stability. Okay. Okay, so looks like stability has their own as well. So there's like a depth map one. There's a canny edge one. This one looks like it takes in a photo and recolors. Not really sure how that even works in terms of how things work, but there are other models here as well. So you can sort of dig around and find them. Just make sure you install, I would recommend at least installing OpenPose and the depth model, because those are probably the two we'll look at. So those of you that are on Comfy, you're in luck because we don't need to worry about all of that. The way to add a control net is we're going to double click on our space here, and we're going to look for apply control net. And there are two options here. There's the regular one and then there's the advanced one. I actually don't think the advanced one is that much further ahead. There's also this other one that's called apply advanced control net. I actually tend to use this one the most, the ACN advanced control net. So let's actually start with that one. These other ones, they're actually all fairly similar. We can actually drag them out and look at them together. So let's go to apply control net. This is the basic one. Apply control net advanced. Okay, so we'll see here we have three different apply control nets. There is this one, which is sort of the most complex. There is this middle one, and then there's this other one at the end. I would say, the one that's most helpful or probably the most useful would probably be this middle one. The start percent, end percent works a little bit like, I think we looked at this for IP adapters, where you can sort of set at what point the control net kicks in. And that's kind of helpful to have. I do find that I tend to use that sometimes where I let the model sort of work for a little bit and then apply the control net, and then I let it run for a little bit and then turn it off. So this one is kind of your least helpful or least useful. But if you just want a basic control net, you can do that and control strength with that. Are we going to look at anything in here that we need? Actually, don't think we will. So we're actually going to skip this one. I'll delete this one. So let's just work with our apply control net advanced instead of the advanced apply control net. So it should look like this. Cool. So we'll see from here that this actually works on our orange node system, and that is our conditioning node. So what we can do now is we can actually make ourselves a little bit of space here. Let's grab the K sampler, the V decode, and the save image and drag them out. So make ourselves a little bit of space here. We're going to basically stick this in the middle of our conditioning queue. So what we'll do is we'll take our positive prompts. I wish the default here was colored. All right, so we'll take our positive prompt and plug that into our positive. We'll take our negative out of here and plug it into our negative. And then we will do the same on the output. So we'll apply output to positive, negative to negative. And what we need are two new things here. So we need a control net, which is going to be our model, and then we're going to need an image. So let's do this. So let's do the shift. We'll click on the control net node. We'll drag it out, and we'll hit shift control. And you'll see here that the options are load advanced control net model, load control net model, load control net model diff, all sorts of things. Honestly, the only one I tend to just use the load control net model. That's everything I need. So let's click on the very top one. You'll see here, we just need to pick our control net. So when we click on this, we'll see there are, again, a ton of options here, right? So, and this is probably where we want to decide what model we want to use. I would recommend we start with SD1. So let's just type in SD1, and we'll see here that there are a bunch of different control net models. And all of these are Control V1-1, SD 1.5. So you'll see we've got, let's see, we've got a depth map, we've got Canny, we've got OpenPose. Why don't we start with the depth map? So we'll just select that model. So it's SD1/control underscore V11 F1P SD15 depth. And then the other thing we need here is we need an image. Now, if you were to just shift control click off of this, it's going to tell you to load an image. You might think, great, let me just upload an image I want to work off of, right? So let me just use an image I already have here. Let's just use like this image. Now I'm going to tell you this isn't going to work. And the reason this isn't going to work is because the image that is being expected here is a depth map. So we actually need to create a depth map from this image in order to feed that into our model. And for that, there's a couple different ways we could do this. If you double click here and just type in depth, you'll see there is a depth anything processor. And with this, we could just feed in our image and take our image out and feed that back into the image. So we can just try this here. We could just do image, take this image out. And the other thing I like to do, just so I'm always sort of debugging as I go, is I'll double click here and I'll type in preview, and I'll get a preview image. And we'll drag this out as well. So what this is going to do for me then is this is going to actually process my depth map using a tool called Depth Anything, which I think is Facebook's model. Don't quote me on that. And actually, we'll look at installing a new version in just a minute. This will do my depth processing. I'll be able to preview what that depth map looks like, and then it will send that depth map to our control net. So why don't we go ahead and just start with this. So I'm just going to hit Q, and it's going to, and actually I want to set my checkpoint correctly. So you can do whatever you want. I'm going to actually use the default run comfy, which is the base v15 pruned EMA only. It's this one, run comfy default. That's just the basic stability 1.5 model. But because we're using our v1.5 control net, we need to make sure we're using a v1.5 model as well. And then we want to set our empty latents to 512 by 512. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase the batch to 4. That way I generate a couple different images just so I can sort of see what the results are. At this point, I can hit Q prompt. And so we'll see it's doing its depth anything thing. And now it's going to actually load our checkpoint in. So you can see here's what the depth map looked like, which is pretty good considering this isn't a photograph. It's just like a drawing. And now we're processing it using Controlnet. And now it's being saved out. So I'm using the default prompts from the default, which is beautiful scenery, nature, glass bottle, landscape, purple galaxy bottle. And already the images are kind of interesting. We get some, definitely some glass, lots of purples, that sort of thing. But I'd also say it's not necessarily the best use of a text prompt for this image, right? So maybe let's try to change our text prompt a little bit. So let's do beautiful flower 3D rendering in Octane render. Say 4K high quality just to be lazy. And we can run this again. And now I definitely get some Octane render kind of look to these things. So just with that alone, I'm able to take any image I want to feed and provide a ton of structure to the image to output to this, which is pretty amazing. If we want to soften this a little bit, we want to give the model a little way to play a little more, there's a couple of different ways we could do this. One is, we've mentioned this before, but we could start applying the control net a little bit later and stopping it a little earlier. So we could try this. So you can see that kind of gives a little bit more of these textures. It keeps some of the base structure, especially around the flower, but it kind of gives us a little bit more of other shapes around the outside. And that's probably because a lot of this sort of black to gray space along the outside isn't being forced upon the model. The other thing we could do is if I want to go back and set this to 0, 0, and 1, is we could play with the strength a little bit. So we could turn the strength down quite a bit and see how that affects our output. So strength actually seems to have a little bit, changing the start and end had a lot more of a dramatic effect on the exterior of the image. Turning this down tends to just generate some more variations, right? So this particular image, you can see there's a lot more variation in sort of the leaves. Our bud is now open a little bit more. This one, almost the pose seems to be a little bit different. There's also some text there. So you can see that, changing the strength of this allows you to do different things with it. So there we go. So this is the depth model. Now, there's one other thing I want to show everyone, which is that there's actually a new version of Depth Anything that's available now from Facebook. And someone has made a new node for it. So we go to our manager, and we go to Custom Nodes Manager. And I'm going to type in Depth Anything V2. So I've already installed it, but it's this one. It's called ComfyUI Depth Anything V2. And the nice thing about this one is you don't need to download any models. It's going to auto download the models for you. So if you go ahead and install this one and then restart your machine, you can also utilize this one. And this one I've heard from people is like a much better model in terms of actually doing a depth estimation. In this particular image, I thought it was pretty good, but I think especially with people or with crowded scenes or where there's a lot of complexity, that's where some of the depth estimations can be off a little bit. So if you install this one and run that, you'll actually find that I think it's a little bit better. I can go ahead and show you how to access it for those of you that are maybe installing it now. This does not come with Run Comfy. So with Run Comfy, you would need to install that yourself. And obviously for those of you locally, you need to install it yourself anyway. To access this one, what you end up doing is you type in depth anything. It's not this one. It's actually, you scroll all the way to the bottom, and there's this thing called depth anything V2. When you drag that in, you'll see that this one has a slightly different sort of way it works. So the input is you need to choose a model, and then you need to choose images, and then you get an image output from it. So let me just delete this real quick. So I'll plug in my image here, and I'll plug my image into my control net here. And then if you shift control drag, release, you'll see is download and load depth anything V2 model. And for this one, there's actually a couple different models. So this would probably be speed. How quickly do you want the estimation to work versus quality, or like, how good the depth estimation is. So there are a couple here. VIT S, I believe, is VIT small. I don't know what VITB stands for, probably in the middle. And there's a VITL. And FP16 is going to be a little bit smaller, a little bit faster. FP32 is going to be more accurate. So you've got a bunch of different options here. You could also Google the names of these models and maybe see what they might work better for. Some of these might be better for, I don't know, people. Some might be better for, highway scenes or like driving scenes, that sort of thing. So I could go ahead and let's just choose VIT-S FP32. And let me just plug in my output here to my preview again. And we'll just do qprompt. That was quite fast. I mean, it is a small model, so. All right, generate. Damn. Okay, I didn't even see if this changed really. Another thing you can do here, which I highly recommend for anyone that sort of wants to play with different models, you could obviously like work with the original tool, plug this image in here, and then copy another preview and output this here. And you kind of drag this and get kind of murky with our nodes, but we actually see these side by side with each other. So this one is version 11. Actually, what I want is, yeah, that's right. Okay, cool. So this will allow me to sort of see the difference between these two models. So I can kind of see with depth anything V2, there's a little bit more definition in the flower itself. Maybe a little bit, actually some sharper edges as well. This might be loading in at a larger size as well. Better maybe stem recognition. So there is some difference here. And that would obviously change your control net as well. It would help you sort of, maybe get better definition in those shapes. I noticed already here with this one, since it's loading V2, you can really see that the petals on the flowers are much more defined. Also, maybe it gets a little bit more jaggedy here on the edges, so maybe you want to reduce the strength, or maybe even just like the other version better. This one tends to have a lot more texture in it. So that is that's depth estimation. Now, the other thing we do here is let's attach a person. Let me find a photo of a person. So person dancing. So I'm just going to screenshot this body. It's fine that it's a little low res, not the end of the world. And what we could do here is let's change this to be an upload of this person. And let's change our prompt to be person dancing, flat background, say green, flat background, high quality. Okay, and I'm just going to put not safe for work in here because you never know when you start asking for bodies if you're going to get naked people, especially with 1.5. So definitely make sure you include that in your prompt, especially because I want to be able to monetize this video eventually on YouTube. We'll go ahead and hit Q prompt. So if we zoom in here, we can definitely see the difference between these two models. Depth Anything V2 has way more definition in these shapes. Depth Anything V1 has a lot more blurriness. So that means this is probably going to have a better output as well in terms of our shapes. But look at how distorted some of these body poses are. Actually, let me do this. Let me turn the strength down here as well. And we'll definitely see that our body poses get kind of weird and murky. I'm actually surprised it's able to find, you can kind of see the hand is getting a little bit distorted. And that's, this model is doing a pretty good job. This one, actually, I bet if we fed this one in, we would see how distorted that hand's going to get. So let me do this real quick. Let's plug in this image into our control net. So this is plugging in the old Depth Anything instead. Yeah, you can kind of see it, it doesn't necessarily know where the hand starts and where the arm starts, that sort of thing. So what should we do here? Well, the nice thing about control nets is this is all just a continuation of our conditioning. So we could feed in another control net, right? So if it's a body pose, why don't we just take the pose structure and actually add pose in as well? So in this case, what we can do is we can copy this. Let's grab all of this stuff, drag it out, and let's add another control net. Order does kind of matter, but I found it's like really hard for me to say the exact order that is going to be important. Strength is probably more important in terms of order of operations. I'm going to go back and plug in my ControlNet v2, and I'm going to delete, just to clean this up. Actually, let me save this out. So we save, and we'll do depth ControlNet. Okay, now I'll add this back in. And I'm going to delete my v1 depth anything. And we are instead going to look at just the pose detection, or sorry, a pose detection system. So for this one, we want to use open pose. So we'll use SD1 control V111 SD15 open pose. And so for this one, what we're going to do is we're going to connect our nodes again. And connect positive to positive, negative to negative. And we want to connect our control net model here. And then we need an image. So again, we're going to use this image, but instead what we're going to do is we're going to process it differently. So we're going to use, let's say, pose. So you'll see here there is an open pose preprocessor. There's a couple others as well. There's dense pose. The thing is, I think all of these can be fed into that pose detection system because still just feeding an image, which is a little confusing because usually you feed in points. But yeah, so you can sort of see here that there's options here. So let's do the open pose preprocessor. And what we'll do is we'll feed in the exact same image here into open pose. And then we'll feed the image from this to our image. And then we can decide what we want to enable here. So OpenPose can do hand detection, it can do body detection, it can do face detection. Because my face is looking pretty gnarly here, I think we should leave all these on. It's likely that I'll get better results with the hands and the faces on, because it'd be nice if I didn't have a face that looked that scary. So let's leave all of this on. Now, this will slow down the model a little bit. It's going to take a little bit longer to process all these things. But, probably giving better results. When we start to hit video, video is where like processing speed might matter more, because the number of frames we need to process, the number of frames we want to output, like all this is going to sort of exponentially explode on us. But while we're just sharing images, we can sort of leave everything on and not worry about speed or performance. So last thing is I want to do a preview image as well, just so we can kind of see what we're working with here. Okay, so it's a little unwieldy, but we've got it here. So this is our depth anything model. This is our open pose model over here. Just kind of stack this stuff a little bit. Okay, so let's run this. And I've got my strength set for both set to 50. Let's just run it and see what happens. And so there you go. I mean, our faces are not better, are not much better. They're a little better. They're not as distorted. This is probably because of SD 1.5. SD 1.5 just isn't that great of a model at generating faces that low of resolution. If we were to do this with SDXL, we might get better results. Then the control nets are slightly worse on that side, so we might get better, sort of control nets out of that. So you'll see we get a little bit of a better face, definitely better hands, not perfect, but better. We could try crank up the strength on this. This is our pose detection system. Let's try just cranking this up, 1.0. And I also want to change, I don't really want this bright green background. Let's just say black, flat background. Let's say person man dancing. Okay. Let's go ahead and hit key prompt. Again, because it's SD 1.5, because it said black, I'm getting a black man, often on a black background. So here you'll see I get a black man on a red background because it couldn't figure out which black we were talking about. But you'll see we're getting pretty good results here. And you'll see across these images, again, this is SD 1.5, so you have to kind of lower your standards a little bit for image generation. But you'll see here, we're getting some nice pant texture. Not every image has pants texture on it. The hand poses are pretty good. Faces are not great, but there's a whole bunch of other tools that we could look at for face improvements that I'll kind of skip for this session. Maybe I'll record other sessions on that. I tend to not do a lot with faces, so I kind of don't care. But for those of you that are really interested in faces, there are a lot of tools built around making faces look better, like a lot. So we can look at those as well. So the last thing I want to mention here is, this is our pose system. But if you look at our actual image of our person here, you'll see there's a lot of creases in the shirts that aren't really being picked up either by, the certainly not by OpenPose, right? OpenPose is just a skeletal system. But you'll also see that even, the depth map doesn't really cover sort of the internal wrinkles of things. And often what I find is people want to take, an image from a person and sort of recolor it, or say blue shirt, green shoes, that sort of thing. And what will tend to happen is they'll want the exact structure of this shirt just recolored. And that's where I would say something like Canny is probably a better model for that. So let's get crazy and let's just add a whole other model here. So I'll grab these. I'll just pull these out here. And we'll just copy and paste these again. So we'll copy our control net. We'll plug everything in again. And then we need another control net model. And this one, we're going to use Canny. So we need an image processor for Canny. So let's just say Canny. You'll see there is a couple here. There's one called Canny Edge, Image Canny Filter, Canny Preprocessor Provider. There's like a million names for all these things. Let's do the last one. I feel like I've used that one before because it comes from the Inspire pack. And I do not ever remember how Canny works. I know you have to like, and actually this one just gives me, this doesn't give me an image. So let's actually not use that one. Let's say Canny. All right, cool. This one will give me an image, which is great because I can use that. So plug in our image here. And then we'll plug in our input image from over here. Whoa, boy. Go. And then let's add a preview here because I also know that I usually need to play with the thresholds to get different values out. So hit Q prompt. Interesting. Okay. Oh, this isn't even enabling threshold. This is just doing other stuff with this. Okay. Here we'll see we get this very harsh outline. This is the thing I notice mostly with Canny is that if you set Canny's strength to 1, you basically get these outlines spit back to you. So especially with Canny, you don't really want these sort of hard edges because those hard edges are going to show up in your image. So usually what I'll do for Canny is I'll set this to like a value of 0.5. Let's turn thresholding on and let's see if we get a better generation here. Really, I don't want these like double lines. I just want some single lines that kind of show the texture in his clothing. It did not give me a better result. Let's turn low up a little bit, down a little bit. I think because I've got a black man in a black shirt. Let's see. Let's see if I can make this 1.5. This might be a little bit tricky. Let's say green shirt. Oh no, where did my manager go? This happens to me every once in a while. Let's try refreshing the page. This is still a bug. I've told them about this before. I think you go to My Machines, you go to Open. There we go. Okay, so person, man, dancing, green shirt, let's say yellow pants, black flat background. Let's try this again. So it kind of follows this a little bit better, right? But you'll see we actually now have the textures of our shirt. It didn't preview my image for me because let's do this. Let's drag this guy all the way over here so we can compare our images. And you'll see it's not perfect, right? Because the strength has been lowered. It's not the exact same ripples, but it does capture it in a better way than we had previously. And you'll see it still can't do black backgrounds. Once you start throwing SD 1.5, like 5 different colors, it just like freaks out and has no idea what it's supposed to generate, unfortunately. So still a black man, green background. Let me see if I can make a white background. This might really confuse it. It's going to try and generate a white guy and a black guy together. Okay, well, still really can't figure out backgrounds. But you'll see it does begin to introduce the texture from the pants. And that's kind of the nice thing about Canny. So what you could do with Canny is, it's a much better at capturing textures. So we've got 3 different models here now. We've got one that is capturing sort of the depth, the shape of the body, how it works in space. We've got open pose, which is grabbing the person's shape, their skeletal outline. And then we've got the canny filter that is then grabbing the textures of the image itself. Let's try this one more time. Yeah. So you'll see, we are starting to capture a little bit more of the face and the body and the texture here. One of the downsides of this is I can see already is that because this guy's wearing headphones, um, as we begin to add in Canny, Canny introduces that texture, those shapes, in a much more hard way. So we get people with weird ears or weird other things going on in their face. So this is a thing to be concerned about. I wonder if we can actually mask out the. Try this. I'm gonna take this image and feed it into Canny again. And this time I'm gonna add a mask to this. Open a mask editor. So I want everything except his face, essentially. So hard with this the crudest of drawing tools. All right. Smaller. Okay. Yeah, it looks like it still processes. Some masks are not fed into the image canny filter. It's probably another one that actually would feed it in. Maybe it's one of these other ones in Canny. Let's see, Canny Edge. Nope. All right, so there's probably another one that, you can also probably pre-process it somehow and do some masking to get the image sent here to be cleaner. Nice little try, but it didn't really work that well. So now we've seen the power of control nets, right? And there's 20 other control nets we could do this with. But I think there's a lot here to play with, depending on the level of detail you want to imply into your image. We didn't even look at this, but you could also even feed in this image using image to image, and then you would have a little bit of the colors coming in. Like there's a lot of ways to layer all these pieces together in a really interesting way. Let's say we wanted someone, let's change this to a woman that's dancing with a skirt or something. So let's go person, let's say woman dancing in dress. And I think the first time we run this, it's going to be way too harsh, like in terms of our structures. So we can do, I did it again. Run comfy, killing me here. All that zooming in and out, I think, means it loses its position for the manager. Okay, let's run this again. Oh, it still says person dancing. So let me switch to man. Woman dancing in a dress. So see, you don't really get the dress, right? Because we've got way too many like other things that are too strong on this. So one thing we can do is maybe I would just bypass all of my canny, or we could just set the strength to 0. Maybe we set our depth estimation to be something much lower as well. But let's keep the control net of the open pose at the same level because we want the body structure to be the same. So we'll Q prompt here. And now I've got a dress. I've got pretty good structure otherwise. This one's doing some weird stuff. Maybe we'd crank open the depth map back up. I've got 3 legs kicking off in weird directions. This one's actually quite good. That arm's a little weird. Actually, this arm's a little weird too. So, again, I bet we could actually turn strength and control net up. Yeah, better. Not perfect, but better. So again, depending on what you're trying to do, the strength and the level at which you use different tools can have a big impact on things. So just keep that in mind as you play with these different control net tools, that each one is going to have a slightly different sort of positive and negative in terms of what works, in terms of what doesn't, that sort of thing. Cool. So let's stop here for control nets, and then we'll take a short break, and then when we come back, let's actually look at some of the new models that are now available in Run Comfy. So let's come back in like 10 minutes. We'll come back at 6 after, wherever you are. So 9:06 for those of us on the East Coast. Sound good? Cool. All right. See everybody in a little bit. All right. Welcome back, everybody. Were there any questions about control nets before I jump into the next thing?
I have a very broad question.
Yeah, please.
How hard is training a control net for a specific purpose?
That's a good question. I've never actually tried. I would say it's probably a lot of it comes down to data, right? Do you have the data to sort of
I
show the
do.
mapping between things? Then I think you could probably get away with it. Yeah.
I have one side of it. I need to process the other side, like would be the structure, and
Hmm.
then I have all the pairs.
Yeah. I mean, let's look at it during Q&A. I'd love to figure out. I'd love to help you if I can.
All right, all right.
Because I think there's probably definitely other models that could be trained. Other some of these computer vision models, like those sort of things. So yeah, we should definitely look at that.
Awesome.
Cool. Any other questions from anybody? Cool. All right, so let's dive into looking at a couple new models. One note is I've started a workflows folder. Let me just pull up the chat here. This is all the workflows that we made this week, as well as a couple that I've already downloaded for people. So if you want some of these workflows, like a couple of these come directly from Run Comfy, some of them come from other things I found online. What I recommend you do is download the SD3 workflow.json and the FLUX workflow.json. We'll use those two today. I've yet to get the Auraflow working, even though I think the model's up there. I think there's something else going on with Run Comfy that needs to be updated, but we'll see if we can do. Okay. As always happens in every one of my classes, in the middle of the class, like all this new shit comes out, and I'm like, shit, do I need to teach the new stuff or do I need to teach the old stuff? So I've done a little bit of both, right? I've taught a bunch of old stuff. We've worked at with 1.5 and Excel. And I was kind of waiting for Run Comfy to get their shit together and update all the new models. So they have now done that. So look at 2 today because Run Comfy has updated their tooling to support Flux and SD3. SD3 came out about a month ago now. Flux came out 4 days ago. So we can literally look at like the newest models to come out like immediately. There's still no Auraflow support out of the box. I'm looking to see if when I switch to the Flux beta update, if I can run Auraflow through that. If I can, then I'll record a whole other video on what Auraflow is and why to use it or what it's good at. So one thing to remember is that we've looked at a bunch of cool shit in this class using IP adapters, using LoRa's, using control nets. None of that stuff yet exists for these models. So every time a new base model comes out, someone needs to go and do the work to train a canny edge detection system, train OpenPose on it, to do control nets, how to do IP adapter with it. It's usually like just Cubic, the one guy who does IP adapter stuff. It's like falls on him to do it only. I've started to see some people have made LoRa's for Flux, but they're not as good yet. So people are still trying to figure that out. So basically, we've got a couple really cool new image making tools, but not all of the other things that Comfy is good at or all the other appendages that give us more control yet. So it could happen as soon as next week. Like someone will be like, I'm going to commit to making all these things for Flux. And it might never happen. What we've kind of seen with stability models is that people are kind of frustrated with them and don't want to go and support all the new stability stuff because who knows what's going to happen to stability in the next 6 months, next month, whatever. So I can't guarantee you that if you really like stability or SD3, then in a month there's going to be a control net for it. I have no idea. I can tell you right now, the community loves Flux a lot right now. So I imagine out of all of these tools, the one that's probably going to get the most support is going to be Flux. But even that's hit or miss, right? Because who knows what happens with all these companies. This is the joy of open source, right? But we can at least play with these models and sort of see what's good with them in terms of just purely text prompting and sort of see where that goes. So the one I mentioned that came out about a month ago is SD3-medium. This gets in a whole other topic. I don't know how deep I want to go into this, but Basically, Stability released this new version, SD3. They initially released what they call their small version. People hated it. So they said, okay, we'll release the medium version to you, which you should like more because it supports more stuff. People used it and they're sort of like, I actually don't really like it that much. There's a bunch of problems with it. And Stability has not really released a large version. I believe through their APIs, you can get their biggest version. But that means you can't use Comfy with it, or you can't use other tools with it. It's purely like an API tool. Run Comfy already has it installed. We'll look at it now. But if you want to download the models yourself, either for local versions or forever, this is the URL. It's at Hugging Face. Stability has gotten a little bit more stringent in terms of access. I say that because you just now need to fill out this form. So you just like say what your name is. You give them your email address. I can spell today. Tell them what country you're in. And then organization, I'm just going to lie. Well, not lie, but I'm just going to basically fake my credentials a little bit more. And no, I don't want emails. And you just sort of agree to licensing. This is all they care about. As soon as you hit yes, they're going to like immediately allow you in. Then you can download the files from here. So we can see that there are a couple different versions of the SD3 medium. The most basic version is a 4 GB file. The biggest version is like 16 GB. And this is like includes, we'll see this when we actually look at the workflow, that different models need different versions of clip installed with them, that sort of thing. So basically, this is the option you have of downloading these files directly from Stability. In Run Comfy, we actually already have these models, which is great because, as you probably know, downloading all these files, uploading all these files is a pain in the ass. It takes like a couple hours. Thankfully, with Run Comfy, we don't need to do that. So in Run Comfy, if we just go to runcomfy.com/ComfyUI, and then we go to, again, not the best design, site design, but if we go to the section here called Generate Images, and you scroll down a little bit, you'll see there is a page here called SD3, Stable Diffusion 3 Text to Image. What you can do is you can just click Run Workflow. If you still already have your Run Comfy open, then all you actually need to do is take the workflow you downloaded. So take the SD3 workflow and just drag it into your Run Comfy machine. If you stopped your instance during the break, which is totally fine, you just hit Run Workflow. And then I believe you need to choose at least, I don't know if it works for medium, to be honest. I think I'm on a large. I'd probably recommend large just to be safe. Medium might work for you, or you might get an out of memory error as soon as you try and run it, and then you're going to need to restart your machine in a large. So maybe for everyone's sanity, just use large just for now, and then I'll do a little more testing and figure out if we can actually run medium on this. Okay, so what I've done here is I've dragged in my workflow. Just dragged it in and it generated here. So the Pulate Stability or the Pulate Comfy, they used to be all one and the same, and now they're different. Someone made this workflow. Somehow it got to the Run Comfy folks. I've already saved it from what they sent, what they have available to there, and I've added it to our workflow folder. So let's just go through and break down. Like we'll probably start to look at this more as we get into the next couple weeks. Let's download someone else's workflow and try and decipher it, right? Like that's essentially what a lot of the forward work that we're going to be doing over the next couple weeks is going to be doing, is like download someone's workflow that looks cool, and then you open it, you're like, what the hell is this? And we'll try and like break down and decipher how it all works. Okay, so also I've turned off some stuff because they have an upscaler that I don't really care about using because it's going to slow us down. So let's start all the way here at load checkpoint. So we see here that there are load checkpoint, there's a checkpoint name, and if we click on this, we know we want to use SD3. So if we type in SD3, we'll see that there are a couple options. What they're doing is they're loading just the base model, and then they're separately loading all of the clip models. There is another way to do this, which is just to select this model and then skip this step. But I actually think this step is important to understand or like to think about. So for now, let's leave this at the medium. So we're loading essentially just the UNet model and the VAE. So you can see that because this clip model has nothing output from it. Next, we have this node called triple clip loader. There's also a double clip loader, I believe. Double clip Dual clip loader, of course. Triple and dual instead of triple and double. Delightful naming, guys. Okay, so there is a triple clip loader. What this is doing is loading 3 different versions of clip. It's loading clip G, clip L, and this other one called T5XXL FP8. This gets maybe a little bit complicated, but it's kind of good to know. Essentially, you can load multiple versions of clip and run them all at once. And what you do is sort of what's called ensemble, which essentially means you calculate all their scores at once and you kind of average them. And what people have found is that loading a bunch of different models and averaging all their scores, you get the best result out of that. It's kind of like taking a classroom of students and like giving them all an average score. Like might suck for the people that got A pluses, but for the people that got C's, they're going to get a better score out of it, right? So this kind of averages out all the clip scores. So that's essentially what they're doing here is they're just loading in a bunch of these. When we actually look at Flux, I think Flux does dual clip encoding or dual clip loading. It's the same idea. Like basically everyone has moved to this idea. Like we can actually see across SD3, Flux, and Auraflow, everyone's kind of moving to the same idea of how to improve our models. And one of the ways is to load in multiple clip models at once. There's this other node called model sampling SD3. I have read the research on this and I can't really explain what this is, other than to say that there's this like parameter in here that allows for variance in images. And they did all this research and they said humans really like a shift score of 3.0. So that's what the default is. You can actually play with this number. It goes anywhere from 0 to I think like 20. But people do tend to like 3 the most. 0, I believe, generates like black images, so you don't want that. But like between 1 and 15 are kind of some scores you can use, but we'll leave it as the default. Next, we have our clip text encode, which is just our output. This is just, our text prompt. So you'll see that text prompts in SD3 tend to be much more wordy. I think I'm kind of assuming that's because we're loading in a bunch of different clip models. And some of these clip models can handle a much bigger, what we call context window, which means more words. So what tends to happen a lot with the SD3 as well as some other models as well, you'll see far more descriptive content. And the goal there is to generate that image in a much more descriptive way. With SD 1.5, this would have been kind of worthless because a cozy red coat isn't going to really work for SD 1.5. It just doesn't understand all those concepts. You'll see it also describes the background a little bit clearer with a lot more other words. Basically, what they recommend for SD3 is that your text prompt be more verbose, add more to it. I've seen people attaching an LLM node to this model. Basically, you say like, here's my basic prompt. Can you add to it? So people are getting very lazy and or like very high tech with this to generate a much longer text prompt. So there's lots of ways to do this, but in general, you want a much more wordy text prompt if you're going to use SD3 or other models. That gets fed into our sampler, right? Yes, that gets fed into our sampler at the positive. We've got our negative here. And our negative is doing all sorts of crazy shit, which I was trying to figure out what exactly is happening here. Just like what we were doing with Controlnets earlier, there's a starting and an ending point for these things. So what you're able to do here is set a starting point. Basically, we're saying like, don't really apply the negative prompt until we get a little bit further into our image generation, right? So we're saying don't start the negative prompt until 0.1. And then there's another one here that is adding it, and then we're doing that combining thing. I couldn't tell you exactly what this is hoping to achieve, but someone somewhere probably realized this is the right way to do negative prompting because we've never really had a good, clear way to do negative prompting. I'm guessing what they're learning is that if you like sort of tone down a negative prompt in the early stages, you get a better, more like realistic result. But you also do want to have some of the negative prompting happening in later stages. That's kind of what I think is happening here. You'll see that our empty latent is actually a thing called empty SD3 latent. Because the SD3 model is much larger, we actually need to feed it kind of a different latent image. So you have to feed it this empty SD3 instead of the traditional empty latent. The parameters all look the same. It's just the node is feeding different things to it. And then what we see here is we're using our regular K sampler, but what someone did is we can actually look at this. If we go to convert widget to input, actually the convert, we right click on this and we see convert image, or so convert input to widget, we'll see that someone converted the seed value here to a widget so that we can plug into it. It's basically the same thing. All they did is move this out, which I guess means maybe you can like parameterize this in some way, or you just set it kind of like the thing that a lot of people tend to do is they set all their parameters in one column. So then they can sort of like go down the rows and just sort of edit these. So instead of like going over here and like editing things, you just edit all your parameters here and leave everything else the same. If we go to our case sampler, we'll see here some different defaults than we usually use, right? So usually our default CFG score is an 8. Usually our steps are around 20, and our sampler is usually like Euler. What the stability folks have realized is that for their model, for whatever reason, the best steps, CFG, and sampler are these. You could go and play with them, but I actually think in SD3's case, I think they really say they only support DPMPP2M for whatever reason. Then we've got our traditional VAE decode, and we've got our save image. So at this point, we can just run this thing and see what happens. Now, these models are a little bit larger, so they're going to take a little bit of time to load. But just know that, like, they'll load, and once they're loaded the first time, then they're cached. So it's going to take a long time to load all this stuff because we're loading a lot of models. But once we're done, it is all cached. And I'd say even reading the prompt here is kind of helpful. 3 same size, adorable, and cute animals in coats, outdoors in a picturesque and beautiful summer setting. And then it goes and it says what each of those 3 is. So a golden retriever, a Siamese cat, and a fluffy rabbit. You'll see actually this is using prompt strength, prompt weighting. So it's weighting that they're one of the animals is holding an SD3, a sign that says SD3. So the new models are also better at generating text. If you've ever generated text in 1.5, it looks like gobbledygook. It like doesn't, it looks like letters, but they aren't actual letters. SD3 is much, much better at that. Okay, so here's our output. So did a golden retriever in a cozy red coat. It did it's maybe not a Siamese cat, in a snug blue solid colored coat, and a fluffy rabbit in a yellow fur trimmed coat. And the background is a vibrant garden filled with blooming flowers, lush green grass, and a clear blue sky. So I can tell you prompt adherence in SD3 is far, far better than even in SDXL than in SD2. It's generally pretty good. The thing that people are kind of frustrated with is certain human poses do not work well. That gets into the whole like history of stability and like creating nude images and that sort of thing. Lots of women do not get generated quite well in SD3. There's some rumors that the reason they did that is like they went in and actually clipped out those pieces from the medium model to reduce the amount of people that can make nude images or make women. So there are some issues there. And again, there's also then no control nets yet for this. We can't also control body poses using control nets. If you don't care about generating women, which I hope most of us don't, or like whatever, you can probably get some good use out of SD3 medium. If you want to generate women lying in grass, like that's where it really struggles. Let's actually try it. And for my own sanity, and let's change our batch to 4, just so we generate 4 different images so we can kind of see, whoa, that's way too big. 4, thank you. I mean, first off, like obviously this prompt is too short, right, for what we want to do with SD3, but we can at least play with it and see what happens. I love that this dog has a little hand. Oh, I didn't even notice that. So again, there's still some weird stuff that happens with these models. Actually, this bunny has too many arms and legs too. So it's got about 10 legs there. Yeah, so you can kind of see some very weird poses here. And this was kind of a meme for a while, for like a week or so, where everyone was trying to generate these and they kept getting weirder and weirder images. I would argue SDXL probably also kind of made a mess of these, but because we have control nets, you're able to generate some better images using those things. So just be aware that like many people in the community do not like SD3. They kind of feel like stability kind of sold them out. Again, that ties to this whole like crazy world where lots of people want to generate women, animate women, whatever. So I personally don't care. I think you can still get some really good results out of SD3. But you do have to think a little bit more about how your prompt is generated. And that's where I think we're seeing people do like an LLM node they're connecting to help them generate a better prompt. So that's SD3. It works out of the box with any run comfy system, as long as you're loading in the basic, like the new version. I do believe you need at least a large, I don't know, Asher, were you ever able to run this at all? You're able to run yours, weren't you?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay, so SD3 probably does run on mediums then. So when you're launching a medium instance on Run Comfy, you probably will get away with it. Oh, you said you have a 24 gigabyte card, right?
that's right.
Okay. Oh, and I think Garrett left already. So I don't quote me on that. I believe a medium will work okay with SD3 medium. A medium instance on Run Comfy will work with SD3 medium. So many things labeled like this. Next I want to look at Flux. And Flux came out like 4 days ago. So Flux is actually from a bunch of folks that left Stability. So one of the main AI developer trainer folks, Robin, left. I don't even know when he left, a couple months ago. And now he works at a company called Black Forest Labs, or maybe he started it. Not sure about the whole history about all this stuff. It's a little too like reality TV drama world for me. But this week they just released Flux. Flux is basically just like stable. It's just made by someone else. There are 3 versions of Flux available. It's all called FLUX.1. There's FLUX.1 Dev, FLUX.1 Schnell, and then FLUX.1 Pro. And just how I mentioned, SD3's biggest model is not available in like an open source fashion. Excuse me 1 second. Hitting that time of the day where I lose my voice. All right. Just how I said SD3 has a version that's only available via API. Flux, the FLUX.1 Pro, is only available via their API. So you can't use it in an open source fashion. You can't use it on Comfy. The dev version is sort of their medium-sized model that is available open source. You can download it. Click on this link. You might see a different page. You might have to get that whole approval system where you give them your name, your address, that sort of thing, and access their model. You will see the FLUX.1 files. The one you need is FLUX.1 dev SFT. It is 24 gigabytes. So it is a huge pain in the ass to download that and upload that to Run Comfy. Thankfully, the Comfy people have already just uploaded it for you to use anyway. But this is sort of the competitor to SD3 Medium if you want to see them as competitors. Probably not really true, but like that's the way you can think about it. There's also the FLUX.1 Schnell. And Black Forest Labs is a German company, so they name things in German ways. This means fast. FLUX.1 Fast is essentially their faster model, meaning it's a little bit smaller. It's not as good of quality, but you can even see these images still look pretty nice. The nice thing about this one is that it uses 4 steps instead of 20 steps. So we'll look at this more when we get to animation. My hope would be if we get control nets and LoRa's and other things for these tools, that Schnell might be how we do animations in the future, because with less steps, it can run faster, all sorts of things. But the file for this size is also 24 gigabytes. So it's still quite big. So downloading these is a pain in the ass, but they are already installed in Run Comfy if you want them. The way to get them in Run Comfy is we actually need to stop our machine. So the way to do this is we're going to hit stop on our machine. We'll say yes. And what we want to do is actually on this main page here, right at the top, the second tile over, is ComfyUI Flux, a new art image generation tool. So what you'll do is you'll click Run Workflow here. You must have at least a large. I'm going to let everyone else pick a large, and I'm going to pick an XL and just pay a little bit more. But I know you need at least a large to run this. You cannot run a medium on this. The size of the file and the VRAM required to generate images using this are more than 16 gigabytes. So you must have at least a large or larger. So I'm just going to hit XL. And the next thing is you must select the beta release. This is by default automatically selected. You actually can't choose the other ones to get to it, but that's only because you click on this here. If you wanted to launch a machine and just load in that JSON workflow that I had, you could do that from here, but then you still need to make sure that you select the right beta release. So you'll need to select beta release in order to do this. Now, this might be for the next week. Who knows, maybe in a week or so, they'll swap this to the current release and you'll just be able to run SD3 and Flux from the same instance, essentially. But for now, you need to use the beta release. So I'm going to go ahead and hit next here. I'll just give myself 30 minutes, 35, and hit launch. And it's going to take a couple minutes to load. So Flux, how is it different? It's not really that different from a lot of the other SD3 Auraflow tools that are out there. Also, people have only had 4 days to play with it, but I've definitely seen the community kind of jump on Flux as like the SD3 killer. Because again, remember, a lot of people in the community hate stability now. They think stability is like, you know, hurt their freedom of speech, like all this other kind of right-wing bullshit. But that's kind of where the community feels. The community feels like they have been like screwed over by stability and are looking for anyone to replace stability. And they're now jumping on Flux as like the option. Like Flux is going to save us. Flux is the SD3 killer, whatever. As I mentioned, there are no control nets for this. There's no IP adapter. There's no other things yet for it. So it's still to be determined whether or not it really becomes the tool that everybody goes to. Quite honestly, most people, when we look at animations next week, are still using SD 1.5. That model is 2.5 years old now. People are still using that because there's so much other tooling support for it. So Animate Diff, which is the large animation library for it, only really works in SD 1.5. So because of that and all of the sort of like legacy open source tools, people are still really using a 2-year-old model now. But everyone wants something new. So I think people are kind of like pinning their hopes on Flux. We're on this other one called Auraflow. Auraflow is just a much smaller team. It's sort of very open sourcey and honestly not as good as the other models right now, but there's an opportunity for it to grow. I probably won't cover Auraflow, but while we're waiting for this to load, I'm just going to vamp and sort of show you what that looks like.
Derek, quick
Auraflow is
question.
coming. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry. So if I'm downloading Flux locally, does it go to checkpoints folder or does it go to UNet folder?
That's a great question. Sean, I'm going to pull up that thing you sent me, which was in Comfy, I think. Let's see. Yep. Actually, this is a great example. Let me just send you this, Arsha.
Thank you.
So if you want the dev version, it is going to go into models UNet folder. So because then it doesn't include the clip models and the VAE, you just stick it in the UNet.
I see. Thank you.
But Auraflow was created by this company called FAL. I don't know if it's FAL or FAL. And they just recently, I guess about 2 weeks ago, 2.5 weeks ago, released the first version of this. They now are up to V2 as well. Excuse me 1 second. Okay, they are up to version 2. Let's see what versions are here. This is a little old version, FAL. Auraflow V2. So this was like truly, I mean, the highlight here is truly open source. It was made by like 2 or 3 people. It's not like a company. I mean, Fall is a company, but they just like sort of gave machine tools and money to people. But they're not really like supporting it like Black Forest Labs or Stability are. You can download this one. The file is 17.5 gigabytes, so it's still pretty large. I am still working on trying to upload this directly to run Comfy. Once my run Comfy instance is loaded, I'll see if I can actually load Auraflow in. It definitely does not work in the current release that's on run Comfy. It might work in the beta release. I'm going to find out in a couple minutes, to be honest. Why would you choose Auraflow over Flux? I don't really know. I mean, there's different models. They do different things in different ways. I think Auraflow has a little bit more of like a fun kind of like, I don't know, maybe more childlike look to its model. Probably because of the data that was trained on. Whereas I think Flux kind of feels a little bit more like Midjourney, or like it has that sort of like HDR kind of look to it. I think SD3 kind of has the same thing too. So maybe you just want something a little more fun. Maybe you just like to support like very small independent groups. In that case, Auraflow might be your way to go. Um, Again, Auraflow came out 2 weeks ago. People thought like, oh, this is the SD3 killer, and then people were using it. They're like, it's not really as good as SD3. Then Flux came along, and everyone's like jumping on Flux. So there'll be a new thing in 2 weeks that someone else will jump on. Like, who knows? Maybe the good news is that all this stuff is starting to like spread out, and we're getting lots of different models to play with. Because for a long while, it was only Stability. So it was the only company in the space. Now I've got more options. Maybe that's good. Maybe that's bad. Time will tell. It probably means there'll be a lot less resources devoted to each one of these individual models, which means you might be stuck with like, oh, animations only work on this one model, or the best tooling for control nets are on this model. Or more people just get into these things and develop more of the tools. Who knows? We don't know yet. We'll find out. It's kind of the fun or the annoyance of these tools. Come on, let's go. I'd like to stop talking. Okay. Let's see. Anything else I need to mention? Yeah, so Auraflow, again, also no. LoRa is no. Actually, I think I've seen someone train a LoRa using Auraflow, but it's pretty hit or miss yet. With each of these models, you kind of dial in the parameters to get the right results. So it's a bit of a struggle there as well. That's linked for Auraflow. Arsh, if you want to download those files. Okay, I'm just going to stop talking for a second and just let this run until we're ready to go. All right, because I don't want to like just kill time for a little bit. Follow the company. Their main thing is that they produce an API that does faster inference than anybody else at a slightly cheaper rate than anybody else. So that's basically why they release this new model. It's like we can also do inference on it in a much easier way. Also, I should mention, if you're interested in licensing, the Auraflow model is available for commercial use. The dev version of Flux is technically not allowed for commercial use yet. I don't know how that all works or how they like, interact with that or how they restrict that, but that's essentially the licensing. I believe SD3 Medium is now available for commercial. There's a bunch of weird licensing stuff for a while that I haven't really followed. But Auraflow is fully commercial use, which is great if you do want to make money off your images, whereas FLUX.1 dev is still not. Fall does have like this other like sort of site that you can also do fast inference through. So if you want to sort of see what it looks like, your best bet might be to not wait for Uncomfy, but just to come over here and play with it and see what you get. Okay, let's just run it, see what we get. Pricing will be shown once inference is done. I guess that means I get the first image for free. Is that how that works? So it basically like again, because their whole company is around pricing and fast inference. During this image took 15.27 seconds, and it costs about a cent, 1.5 cents. So again, for companies that are trying to generate this stuff, this might be important to you. You might find that replicate is like 2 cents per image. I don't know, there's a bunch of options here. $1, you can run this 59 times. Let's change this out. Actually, let's I was gonna copy and paste that quote from the SD3 thing, but I've lost it now. Wonder if it's in that JSON file. Let's see. Assume it is SD3. Fluffy. There we go. There it is. Okay. Let's see how this performs with its own, the different prompt. And I just got my ding for my my other model. This is great. I vamped for a little bit. All right, interesting. So you can see it definitely looks different, right? This does not have that same sort of photographic sort of 3D quality. Holding a sign was not as successful. I mean, maybe it's just because I only generated one image. But you will say that I still got a golden retriever in a red coat, better Siamese cat, I'd say, in blue coat, and then a fluffy rabbit. And look, they all have the same, well, the cat kind of has weird legs, but everybody else has the right number of arms and legs. So maybe it's better than SD3. I don't know. Again, hard to say with one image. You have to generate like a bunch of images just to figure out if it looks better or if it's better for prompt adherence, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Finally, I can stop talking about Oraflow without knowing much about it. And we can jump to this other model here, which is going to be our Flux model. Still waiting on my workflow to load, though. Okay, I'm just going to load it in. So we are looking at the Flux workflow. Okay, so just like we did with SD3, let's look in and sort of see what we have here. So we've got a load diffusion model. Interesting, it's a load diffusion model and not like a load UNet, which is sometimes what you would use. What is it? UNet loader. Oh, I guess it is now called UNet loader. Okay, so it used to be called UNet loader. Now it's called load diffusion model, which is a better name, but it's a new name in the new version. You'll see that we have a dual clip loader, unlike the triple clip loader that we had before. And this one has a type. So actually interesting. It has SDXL, SD3, or Flux. So you have to determine on your base model which type of dual clip encoder you're using. I wasn't aware SDXL even had a dual clip encoder. That's helpful to know. And then we've got our prompt. You will see here there is no negative prompt. This is one of the things I've sort of noticed about Flux is Flux doesn't generally propose you have a negative prompt. Probably because, honestly, negative prompting has been kind of a mess. Like no one has a real clear guide on how to use it. So this one just says, just give us your base, your positive prompt. I've seen some people hack in a negative prompt, but it's not there yet in the official one. Then we've got this thing called basic guider, which I don't really understand exactly what that means. Apparently you just need it. So you need to feed in your, you need to feed your conditioning out of, into it from your encoder or your prompt, and then you feed your model in, and then there's this output, this thing called a guider. For a reason, there's a new sort of sampler that you need to use. So you can't really use the case sampler that we usually use because there's no input of a guider. And also the noise needs to be fed in from a different way. It's all sorts of funky. It's fun that there's just like a new node you'd have to remember. Like, oh, for Flux, I have to use this node. For this other one, I have to use this node. Maybe I would hope in the next month, like Comfy just is like, okay, here's the one sampler to rule them all, and you figure out what you need to plug in, and it's optional for other models. Who knows? Either way, you need to, for now, use the sampler custom advanced because that's how you name a thing, I guess, in Comfy. A lot of this is more or less the same, right? We've got a latent image. All the new models do 1024 by 1024. That's their base size. SD3, Oraflow, SDXL, SD2, Flux. So they all do 1024s. This one is an empty latent image instead of the empty SD3, which might not even be available through here. Yeah, it is. Okay, so this one, again, just gonna have to remember which node to use in the right instance. Maybe it'll all be merged in the near future. The sampler name is now being selected in a new node, but it feeds in. It's again, it's the same thing. You can use Euler, you can use any of these other ones. And the scheduler is now also set up in its own node. It gets fed in as a sigma, like that we now have a light green node in addition to a dark green node. And same thing. There's different types of schedulers. It looks like the default here is simple, and there's steps, and there's denoise. And then there is a different VAE you need to use for Flux. You need to use the AE.SFT, so the autoencoder.safe tensors. Again, that comes pre-installed when you use the beta release on Run Comfy. Arsha, you'll have to download that file. If it's not linked to in that GitHub, then I can tell you where it is. But that's it. So we can just go ahead and let me set my batch size here to 4. And I would say let's even do this again. Let's use the exact same prompt we had here. And let's see how this one performs at this prompt. I can imagine loading a 24 gigabyte file through this is very slow. But again, after we do it the first time, it's going to be cached. Um, And while I think the medium or the large and extra large instances on Run Comfy are what you are required to run the main dev, the dev default, you might be able to get on a 16 gigabyte card one of these FP8s. Usually that means a reduction in quality. But if you do have your own card and you want to try to make it work, so Garrett, if you're watching this later, you might switch to the FP8 and see if you can run it locally that way. I can't guarantee it's going to happen, but FP8 does mean it's like a smaller file usually. And it does mean you usually can generate on a smaller card. The low diffusion model also has the other Flux model, which is the Schnell, and we'll look at that once we generate this as well. There we go. So golden retriever, Siamese cat, rabbit, holding a sign in a way that isn't just a random leg being thrown in there. I mean, again, the dog still has four front legs and somehow has an arm in some of these. So, again, we're still kind of failing in that way. But you can kind of see why people are immediately like, oh, SD3 is dead, like Flux is better. I mean, again, who cares in the end? Like, use whatever you're going to use. You can kind of see why people are leaning toward Flux as sort of the best model to use right now. Like these results look quite good. And are I would say maybe more aesthetically pleasing, even though I think SD3 is still quite good at prompt adherence. That's really the key thing is people want really good prompt adherence. People will say like, I want this thing in this position, this thing in this position, this thing in this position. I think what's so interesting here is nowhere in this prompt does it say golden retriever on the left, Siamese cat in the center, and fluffy rabbit in the right. But it reads by default left to right, right? It's sort of saying, well, the first thing you told me is this, the second thing you told me is this, third thing you told me is this. So it's reading left to right. It'd be interesting. Let's try this. I'm just going to do one thing. Let's say on the right, golden retriever, on the left, Siamese cat, and in the center, Let's even kind of throw it for a loop by doing it this way. Yeah, so that works. It's interesting that by default it reads left to right, Western world, German company, whatever. But you can reorient it based on providing a new prompt. So it's pretty helpful. Let's lastly look at the Schnell model. So again, the key with this model is that it's fast, but it's not fast in that it runs faster. It's fast in that it uses less steps, which means by default it then does run faster. So we can switch this to Schnell, SFT. And then all we need to do is change the number of steps in our basic scheduler. So we can change this to 4. I think 4 is what generally people use. So this should now generate our images in less steps, meaning as we do it more over and more time, we can generate a lot of images very fast. But because we're restarting with a new model, we have to load in the checkpoint and cache it, so it still takes a lot of time. I was trying to see, while we were waiting for that to load, I was trying to see if I'm on this site, if it gave me better steps. So yeah, you can see the inference steps are 4. Guidance scale is 0. Interesting. Okay. What did I set for the guidance scale here? It set a guidance scale. Might be just coming through this basic guider.
How do you find the load diffusion model in the custom node manager?
I don't think it should be in the custom, but you might need to update ComfyUI. So do
Oh, I
git
see.
pull in Comfy. And that will probably give you the latest version of Comfy, which will probably have it by default there.
I see, I see.
Okay, so my image is generated really fast, right? But if we look at these images, they're a little bit better, but someone's holding two signs. Everything, this image looks a little blown out. This one looks okay. So in general, Schnell is going to generate a lot of images very fast, but I wouldn't say it's as good quality. So for us, it might not matter. For someone that's pumping out slop, marking images or whatever, like maybe it works better for them. Or maybe like we want to get to a place where we can almost do real-time graphics, then some like Schnell, which might take from a webcam and then feed it to Schnell and then output the images. You might get something more like real-time because of these steps. We'll cover a lot of this more when we get to animation, because that's also a key thing for animation too, is like if you're going to need to generate 100 frames of an image or a video, well, then only doing 4 steps per frame is going to be a lot shorter than doing 20 steps per frame. And that leads to like, well, how good of a quality does video frames need to be? All that sort of stuff. So we'll wrap up here because I think it's a good place to stop. But as we think about some of these key things when we get to animations, we can start to see why some of these models are beginning to pop up as, oh, here's a good option that generates in less frames or less steps, so we can have more frames, that sort of thing. Yeah, so we'll call it a night here. So next week we'll start picking up and talking about basic animation stuff, and then we'll spend a couple weeks just doing animation stuff. As a reminder, Q&As are also Thursdays. So if you want to come through and ask questions about any of this stuff, need help loading things, want to train stuff, whatever, just stop by and I can help answer any questions I have for you. Sound good? All right, everybody, have a great night, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Derek.
Yep, bye, everybody.
Thank you. Goodbye.